morning, Dallas. Good morning, SMU. Good morning, World Affairs Council. Thank you, all of you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a great honor. I'd like to start by asking a couple of questions. What does this image have to do with this image? Or this one? Or this one? Or this image? How about this? Or this? I'll get back to that. Okay, second question. And for those of you who saw me speak a few years ago, you'll have to bear with this. I know I pulled this stunt last time. How many of you have ever experienced a power outage? Please raise your hand. Okay, keep your hands raised, keep your hands raised. Pretty much everyone in this room. Now, if it's been for more than 24 hours, keep your hands raised. How about for more than 3 consecutive days? For longer than 1 week? Okay. Now think back and reflect on what that experience was like. What were some of the things you couldn't do? Watch television, use your computer, cook if you use an electric stove, or keep your food refrigerated. What about your job? How many of you could still work if you had no electricity? What would you do? The only kind of job you had was one that didn't depend on electricity. How much money could you make? How would you pay your rent or mortgage? Or put food on the table? Or pay for your children's education? How, in fact, would you ever even survive if you had no access to electricity? Ever. I'll get back to that. Now, I'd like to introduce you to a woman who has become a very special friend of mine. Someone who has taught me more than I could have ever imagined. Ladies and gentlemen, please meet Madame la Présidente, whose real name is Ghanagi Kora. I like to call her Madame la Présidente because she is the president of a women's farming cooperative in the remote village of Dunkasa, which is located in the isolated and desperately forsaken district of Kalale in the northern part of one of the world's poorest countries, the Republic of Benin in West Africa. Here's a map of Benin. It's a country of approximately 7 million people, sandwiched between Nigeria and Togo in West Africa. To get to Dunkasa, you have to fly to Paris from here, and from there catch another 5-hour flight to Cotonou, which is down here on the southern coast, the capital of Benin. From there, it's a 5-hour car ride up to Parakou on a paved road, and another 3 hours along a dirt road to beat the village of Dunkasa up here in Kalale. Kalale is a district of 44 villages, about 100,000 people. None of these villages have access to electricity. Now back to Madame la Présidente. The reason I wanted you to meet her is because she, in fact, everything about her, her family, her village, her whole life, is emblematic of what is missing. That's right, missing from the Millennium Development Goals, or so-called MDGs. Because while the MDGs themselves are quite far-reaching and comprehensive, they've omitted something very important, very fundamental, and that is access to modern energy. If you leave here today remembering nothing else, I hope it is that simple fact. I first met Madame in 2006 when Dr. Mamoudou Setemou, a professor of agricultural entomology at Texas A&M, asked me to travel with him to Africa and visit the village of his birth and see what I could do to help his people. Madame, like 90% of the people in Benin, and like 1.6 billion people in the world, are from a power grid with no access to electricity. She was living on less than $1 a day. And like 90% of the people in her region, she has to grow her own food to survive. A number of her children, the ones that made it past the age of 5, Benin has one of the highest infant mortality rates in the world, suffered from malnutrition. This is a photo I took of several children in Dunkasa the first time I visited. Notice that at least 2 of these kids have distended bellies, a telltale sign of kwashiorkor, a disease caused by a lack of protein and micronutrients. Kwashiorkor, which can be fatal if untreated, is easily prevented from getting enough fruits and vegetables. Many children in Dunkasa, especially young girls, have not been able to go to school because they have to spend hours each day fetching water, just like the girls depicted in this photo. In fact, the women and girls spend such a large percentage of their days carrying water, there's virtually no time left for value-added work or education that could help them earn income and lift themselves out of poverty. And to make matters worse, the district of Kalalei in northern Benin suffers from a prolonged dry season, which lasts 6 months a year. During this period, the land is parched, the people are hungry, and malnutrition is widespread. So when Mamoudou asked me, or introduced me to Madame la Présidente, and I asked her what were the most pressing needs for the village, she said, "Help us feed our children." It sounds so simple, doesn't it? Here in the U.S., if you want to feed your children, you go to the store. And if you want to grow your own food, you need to water your garden, what do? You turn on the hose, right? And when you turn on the hose, water comes out because somewhere a pump is running on electricity to move that water from its source to where we want it, when we want it. And much of what you buy in the store comes from large-scale farms that are driven by massive irrigation systems, without which we too would likely suffer from malnutrition and, well, perhaps even starve. You know, we take so much for granted about the quality of our lives in this country. But in Benin, there was no hose. There was no hose because there was no pump to fill it. And there was no pump because there was no electricity to run the pump. And there was no electricity because it cost about $20,000 or more per mile to extend, for the utility company, to extend the grid from the capital cities where the power is generated to remote villages, places like Dunkasa in northern Benin, where Madame and her family live. In Madame's village, child mortality rates cannot be reduced because there's no access to safe, clean groundwater. In her village, children can't get vaccinated properly because there's been no refrigeration to maintain the cold chain. In her village, Madame can't reduce indoor air pollution because she has to burn a kerosene lamp in her hut just to see anything after the sun goes down. And the smoke from the kerosene contributes to respiratory diseases which claim the lives of 1.6 million people per year. In her village, Madame can't learn to read and write because there are no lights in the school at night to host adult literacy classes. In her village, there's no way to improve maternal health because in the clinic, there's no light to assist with a difficult birth. Here, women often die giving birth by candlelight. In her village, Madame didn't have the luxury to care about environmental sustainability because she needs wood or dung to fuel the fire to cook her food for her children and keep them warm at night because she has no electricity. In her village, Madame couldn't gain gender equality because she was stuck carrying water for 6 hours a day with little or no time left over to improve her own life. She was, in fact, condemned, as the German scientist Peter Ahm said, condemned to a life on the margins. All because in Kalalei, there was no hose and there was no access to modern energy. That is, until now. And that's where this solar array comes into play. When we committed to working in Benin, I knew our first priority was to find a way to overcome the lack of food security, especially during the 6-month dry season that runs from November to April each year. So we partnered with a group called ICRISAT, based in Niger, to pioneer the solar market garden, which basically combines the use of solar energy and drip irrigation to grow fruits and vegetables. Here's a graphic layout of the system. A solar panel pumps water from a borehole to an elevated tank, which then gravity distributes the water to a low-pressure drip irrigation system. It's a highly efficient system, with water as well as fertilizer being delivered directly to the root of the crop. Here's a photo taken before the first growing season. And this is after. As you can see, the place has been totally transformed. With drip irrigation, the women of Dunkasa are able to farm plots of land that are 30 times larger than they did before, and now spend less than 50% of the time they used to in gardens that had to be watered by hand. With their free time, the women are starting businesses like seed distribution, and they're taking their excess crops to market and earning an income for the first time in their lives. In fact, Stanford University's program on food security and the environment has been studying this project since its inception in 2007, and they published their results in January of this year. They found that the women are now earning an extra $7.50 per week selling fresh produce to the market. And they're growing a variety of crops, a broader variety of crops than ever before, providing a greater supply of vital nutrients. Madam and her fellow villagers are now consuming 3 to 5 servings of vegetables per day, the same as the U.S. daily recommended requirements. The daughters are no longer having to carry water all day, which means they are free to go to school. The women and children in the village have filled out and look visibly healthier, something which I noticed right away when I visited last year. In fact, when visiting Benin last summer, I was accompanied by a French film crew that ended up featuring our project on a French television program called Earth from Above. I'd like to share with you a brief excerpt from their program.
When I came the first time 3 years ago, they were very small, and these women were watering the plants by hand, with these small gourds, spending a lot of time walking from the well to the garden, very limiting in terms of what they could do.
Thanks to irrigation, the production has been multiplied by 10. The crops are more varied, and today maize, tomatoes, or even salad grow here.
Le jardin m'a sauvé. Je suis toujours au jardin. On dit comment le soleil peut faire ça? On ne savait pas. On vend et on mange. Et nous mangeons beaucoup ici.
These women can now feed their families all year round, but also earn money and rise from poverty by selling their crops on the markets. Commerce has appeared thanks to solar power, a first step towards development.
Phase 2 of this project, to launch next year, will involve the whole village electrification of these 2 pilot villages in northern Benin, Dunkasa and Bisasi. Solar electric systems will generate power for the school, clinics, homes, street lighting, and community center in each village. We'll also install another solar-powered water pumping system in each of the villages, which will help to greatly reduce the incidence of waterborne diseases, the #1 killer of children under 5 in the developing world. Here's a graphic description of what the whole village scheme will look like. So you have the clinic here, micro-enterprise center, the homes, the school. You have a water pumping system for both drinking as well as irrigation. Here's a little satellite dish. We'll provide wireless connectivity so the whole village will have access to the internet. This is our plan for next year. So what about the Millennium Development Goals? Even though I haven't referenced them explicitly in describing our work in Benin, most of them have been addressed by our project in one way or another. But let's take a closer look now at the MDGs and see just how and where energy comes into play. First, goal number 1, eradicate extreme poverty. Well, let me just give you a few examples. Household lighting extends the productive workday. Electricity facilitates the establishment of village-based microenterprise. And perhaps most important, energy for irrigation increases food production and access to nutrition. Goal number 2, achieve universal primary education. Household lighting enables children to read and study at night. Energy services reduce time spent by school-going children on basic survival activities, such as fetching water and firewood, cooking, and so on. And finally, electricity enables the use of educational media, computers, and internet access at schools. Goal number 3, promote gender equality. Modern energy frees women from extreme household drudgery, increases their employment opportunities, and allows them to participate more fully in community activities. Energy also reduces girls' burden to collect water and fuel and increases their school enrollment. And you'll see many of these MDGs are mutually reinforcing. They're not isolated. They're all connected to each other. Goal number 4, reduce child mortality. Energy is a prerequisite for a functioning health system, contributing, for example, to lighting operating theaters, refrigerating vaccines. If you don't store a vaccine between 0 and 8 degrees centigrade, the potency is lost. And I've personally seen immunization programs break down in rural areas where there's no access to electricity. Power can be used to sterilize equipment and also provide communications. And finally, energy for water pumping and purification greatly reduces the risk of waterborne diseases. Again, a huge killer. Goal number 5, improve maternal health. Besides its centrality to the healthcare system, modern energy can lower maternal mortality by reducing the level of indoor air pollution, which kills over 1 million people per year. It's not often talked about, indoor air pollution, but it's a huge cause of death in the developing world. Goal number 6, combat HIV/AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. Modern energy services for power and communications in rural clinics and hospitals enable a quantum leap in health services. The last few years, we've been very honored to partner with a group out of Boston called Partners in Health, co-founded by Dr. Paul Farmer, who for many years was working in Haiti. About 5 years ago, they branched out and started working in several countries in Africa, including Rwanda, Malawi, Burundi, Lesotho. Well, we started off in Malawi, bringing solar power to their clinics, and replacing diesel generators that they had been using. And now, as a result, Partners in Health is committed to bringing solar power to every one of their clinics around the world, including the 10 that are operated in Haiti. Goal number 7, ensure environmental sustainability. Access to renewable energy technologies helps to preserve natural resources and lower emissions, which helps protect the local and global environment. And lastly, goal number 8, develop a global partnership for development. The Global North can help achieve the MDGs by providing increased access to renewable energy technologies and finance to the least developed countries. So you see, access to energy isn't just related in a peripheral way to the Millennium Development Goals. It's central to meeting all of them. If there's one thing I'd like you to take away from this talk, it's simply this. Without modern energy, especially electricity, there's no way the MDGs will ever be met. Energy is the fuel that powers the engine of development. Take a look at this satellite image of Earth at night. If this image doesn't put things into perspective, I don't know what does. I mean, just look at Africa. Except for a few urban areas, essentially the entire continent is shrouded in darkness. No power, no light, no way to read or study at night, or pump water, or store vaccines, or operate a business, or communicate with the outside world. No way to escape from the endless cycle of poverty and deprivation. If we just stay the course and proceed with business as usual, we will be condemning Madame la Présidente and another 1.6 billion people just like her to a life on the margins. If, on the other hand, we rise to the challenge of the 8th Millennium Development Goal, which is focused on global partnerships, and make a unified commitment to provide universal access to modern energy across the globe, then we will be well on our way to achieving all of the Millennium Development Goals. Just look at this beautiful young woman in Dunkasi, so happy and so proud of what she's been able to accomplish in the past year, thanks to a very small amount of energy that has been generated, in this case, by the sun. With electricity, the 1/4 of the world's population that lives in darkness will have the prospect of a brighter future, of a life filled with hope and dignity and human potential. The kind of life that we would all want for our own children.